Yo, what's going on, snipers, and welcome to the finale of our Vancouver Reign Draft Glory franchise mode here in MLB The Show 23. So yes, this is going to be the very last episode of the series, which was a very tough decision for me to make because obviously with NHL 24 being out, I kind of have to put most of my focus into that game. That's the main reason why I'm ending the series at this point. Also, kind of ending it on a high note of winning a World Series, I think makes the most sense in a way because eventually we would start to lose a bunch of players and our team would probably start to miss the playoffs and it wouldn't be as good. But we are at a pretty peak point in this series because this team has been really, really good throughout the most of the last 5 years. We've started to turn the page quite a bit because we won the World Series now. I think it's in year number 14 it took us to get to a World Series win. But you can see over like the last 5 years in general, our team has started to become one of the best teams in the league. And we go from like 74 and 88 to 93 and 69, fall a little bit off to 88 and 74, but we do win our division and we lose in the exact same spot. And then these last 2 years have been insane. We won 107 games and 55 losses in 2035, lost again in ALCS. But then this time around, we finally broke through on the ALCS after 109 wins, and we won the World Series. So I don't really think there's really much more that I could get out of this team in a way. Like, there is probably the chance that we could win multiple World Series or go to another ALCS, but there's a chance also that we'd be losing a bunch of good players, and I really just don't want to go through another off season, to be honest, because those off seasons are kind of tedious, and it's also kind of painful when you lose good guys that you drafted. But anyways, with this being the finale episode, I'm basically going to be going over every single player on our roster's stats. I will also be showing you guys our roster history thing so you guys can see when we drafted every single player in case you forgot. And yeah, we might look at some former players as well, like Schneider, for example. Moreno, what's his name? Or is it Moreno? I don't remember. It's a friggin' pitcher. Montero. There it is. That's what it is in my head. Montero. Also Jeff Pipp. Those type of things. So we'll definitely take a look at their stats, see how they did since leaving us, and I think that'll probably be it for this episode at that point. Because I don't really know if we need to look really at our minor league players, because obviously we can't even take a look at their AAA career stats and all that. I wish that was something, though, that they did have in this game, because it would be really nice for us to be able to see how good like Shartner's been in AAA over the last 2 years and all that. And yeah, with NHL 24 being out, like I was mentioning, I've been putting in like tons of hours in the roster building, so I just don't really have the time to play this on my own time, because I know some of you guys were saying, oh, maybe you could do 5 years on your own time, then come back and do like a bit of a recap over those 5 years. Well, I just don't know if I have the time to actually get to this, unfortunately, because of my roster building. Like, I've spent 60 hours on my roster build in NHL 24, and I've literally only had the game for not even a week yet at this point, I think, or maybe around a week at this point. So I have literally been spending almost full days on it, which means I don't really have the time to see how like Ozzy and all those guys' careers finish off, which kind of sucks. But I would expect them to be probably Hall of Famers or maybe fringe Hall of Famers. It'd be interesting to see if that actually was the case, but that's that. So let's take a look at our roster history. This is something that I wish NHL games had in it, because it's pretty cool being able to tell when you drafted every player, when you acquired certain players from what teams. This is one of my favorite screens in this game. But you can see in 2023 we drafted some really good players in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th round. The first round pick when that year was Schneider, and Schneider didn't really go on to be anything, and he's now, I believe I saw, he got dealt from Seattle. I can't remember what team he went to. I think it was the White Sox, actually, which is kind of interesting. I did find that out after last episode, so I think he's in the White Sox now. Can't remember who he drafted in the 2nd round, but yeah, Ozzy Cardenas became a beast as a 3rd round pick. Probably one of the channel favorites for the series, and if I'm doing a channel Hall of Fame for MLB as well, I think he would definitely be one to make it. 233 home runs, not the biggest power hitter, but he does have good contact. Had 119 RBIs 1 year and 34 home runs. So yeah, just over his career, he's been very, very consistent. In his rookie season, like batting at 326, when we saw that, we were like, holy crap. And then we gave him some potential boosts, and this guy started to fall off a little bit, but then he started to find his game again in 2030. As you can see, just getting better and better. Fell off a little bit in 2033 again, but just got really good in 2034. and now he's starting on to decline quite a bit because he only batted a 260 this prior season. But yeah, what a player Ozzy Cardenas has been. Can't ask much more out of a third-round pick. Yeah, he was great. Then we got Garth Howe, who we drafted in round 4. Garth Howe is one of the intriguing players of this series because when I drafted him, I had him not scouted at all. And I'm like, I might as well just take a chance on this guy since he might have 99 potential. He could have honestly been a D potential, but he was a high overall, I believe like a 64 or 65 in the 4th round. And then he had 99 potential. I don't know how he slipped through the cracks of the other teams, but they will be regretting that for a very long time because Garth Howe won multiple Cy Youngs in his career. He was a GOAT. He started off his career not off to a good start, obviously, because we weren't a good team at that stage, losing a lot of games. Very bad ERA, but you could see he got much better after that fact and maintained a very solid whip for most of those years. Except for 2034, that was a little bit of an off year for him. But yeah, he was pretty damn good. 204 quality starts out of 331 games. So that's pretty nuts. Considering, obviously, when we started this, he would have not had a lot, right? Yeah, he would have only had 12 quality starts in that first year. But you could see that WAR going from a -1 in the first year all the way up into the positives. So his best year probably was 2033 based on the 6 WAR. Let's see. 19-6, he had a 2.99 ERA and a 1.05 whip. Yeah, that was an insane year. So yeah, there is Garth Howe. Obviously, he would have been signed here still for a long time, which is good in making less and less each year, but obviously we will never get to see the end of that. But yeah, Garth Howe, probably one of the best players in the series, him and Ozzy. And then Bill O'Donnell is kind of an intriguing player. We took him in the 5th round of year 1. He's developed into being a pretty solid player here in the right field, but at the same time, he really wasn't that good early in his career. But this year, he kind of finally found himself with a 308 average, a 23 home run season, and 114 RBIs. He also did help us out quite a bit in extra base hits, as you can see, with 49 doubles this season. And yeah, he started to finally come into his own over like the last 3 or 4 years, where he had like a 280 to a 308 average. But early in his career, he was not doing too well with like 220 averages. We kind of rushed him a little bit because I don't think he spent much time in double and triple A. But yeah, still very, very solid nonetheless. And yeah, the WAR, you can see only a 6.8 in his career because in his early years, he was a negative all the time. But he definitely started to come into his own over the last 4 seasons for sure. So there is Bill O'Donnell, the Canadian. He was one of the only Canadian players, I think, on this team. Then we got George Pinheiro in 2024 in the 2nd round, and he's been our main shortstop of the series. What a guy he's been. He started to definitely turn it around here in the last few years as well. 30 home runs, though, this last season, which was a career high, and same with 104 RBIs. So he finishes off this series with 136 home runs and 565 RBIs, a 273 average, which is pretty good, and a 783 OPS. But yeah, early in his career, he was okay. Then he jumped up to having a good year. Then he kind of fell off for the last 2 years over that. But then he's been good the last 3 seasons. So he's been a little bit inconsistent. He also, I think, ran into some injury trouble in his career, if I remember right. Or maybe it was Pineda or something instead. But he missed a couple games, and obviously that was kind of hurtful, but he would have been back for another season or 2, actually, which is good. Actually, yeah, 1 more season, I think. And then we have Gary Steiner, who we drafted in the 5th round of that same year, and that's probably why I get Steiner and Pinheiro always, I always think of each other when I think of one of them, is because Gary Steiner was our 5th round pick that year, and he has been a pretty good outfielder. He's definitely starting to come into his own as well over these last 4 seasons, as you can see, batting mostly like a 290 to a 328, which is insane. Early in his career, though, he had 1 really good year, and then he fell off the year afterwards. Also, I think he ran into some injury troubles, as you can see in those first 2 seasons, but yeah, he started to definitely come into his own, and he was also a pretty good player. 104 career home runs and 438 RBIs. An 805 OPS is actually really good, and a 284 career average. He probably would have started to fall off soon, but you could definitely see he impacted the team quite well, except for in 2031. And yeah, he was a pending free agent, so he probably would have asked for quite a bit of money in the off season. Then we got Dennis Lake, who's kind of a weird player. Like, I like Dennis Lake's stats from the regular season. He made multiple All-Star games, I'm pretty certain as well. But he'll always be kind of more remembered for his miscues in the playoffs in a way. He didn't have a winning record as a closer, which isn't ideal. But he did have some really good years, like 2034. The ERA and the WHIP absolutely nasty as a closer. And yeah, he picked up 356 saves. He only blew 53. So pretty good ratio, but in the playoffs, I think he blew one, if I remember right. But yeah, that's probably why he'd be remembered for that. But pretty solid closer. And yeah, he probably would have left the team in 2 years because we do have other closers that could take his spot. But yeah, Dennis Lake is an okay player. Then we go to Giancarlo Sixto, who we drafted in the first round that year. So we have 4 players from the second year draft that were on our World Series winning roster, 3 from year 1, which is kind of nuts. Sixto has been dropping off quite hard in these last few seasons because he was like a 95, 96. He probably would be one of the first players to retire out of the main 3, but he's developed into being an absolute stud. 242 home runs, 851 RBIs. And yeah, obviously over the last few years, he's been absolutely insane. Because we gave him a big contract. I don't remember what season it was. It must have been around like 2030. But like his first 2 years, he was kind of average, and we're like, okay. But then you could see from 2029 to current year, he has never had below a 291 batting average. And he had a peak of a 338. So he was absolutely on cruise control over these last, these last 7 seasons, which is kind of nuts. And yeah, he had like 30 home runs one year, 41 home runs, 126 RBIs in the 2033 season. Absolute animal Sixto was, and in the playoffs when we won the World Series, he came through with some really big games. And yeah, his positive WAR is insane. He's almost at a career 100 in WAR over these last few years, though. Like especially the 4 of the last 5. He's been having over 10 WAR. So he's been on crack, but he is definitely on the decline mode. But he is also getting paid less and less each year, which is kind of nice. So we did do a pretty good job with those contracts early on with him and Garth Howe. Then we get to 2025, and it's kind of mid players in a way. Ken Robert, not really much of anything. He's been more of a setup guy as opposed to a closer. And yeah, he didn't really even save much games in his career. 10 games. He blew 16 saves, though, according to this. Jeez. Wow, I didn't even realize he blew that much. So he blew more saves than he had as a setup guy. I don't know if he would have ever been an actual closer on our team, but there is his stats. He's also a pending free agent, so he probably likely would have left the team this year just for the fact that we have like kind of a logjam of pitchers anyways. So there's Robert. Then we have Ray McMahon, who came into a big spot in the playoffs. He ended up replacing Chu, who was not doing too well. And yeah, Chu was struggling. McMahon came in the regular season as well and played, and he was pretty good. So I brought him in the playoffs, and I can't take a look at his playoff stats, which is annoying. No, I can actually. No, I can't. That's pitching stats. I can't take a look at his playoff stats rate from the screen, which is kind of annoying, but he was a pretty big beast in the playoff run, in at least in the last 2 rounds, I should say, to help us get that World Series. So yeah, there is Ray, still signed for 2 more years. Then you'd have a year of ARB, which is kind of nice, before becoming a free agent potentially. Then we go to Luis Guzman, who we drafted in the second round of 2026. And he's been a pretty good setup guy as well. I probably would use him as a closer if Dennis Lake was not on this team. But apparently he's also blown a lot of saves, but it doesn't really matter since he's a setup guy. He's not probably going for the close anyways. But yeah, very solid numbers from Guzman. I think his career is only just getting started. He is 27 already, though, so he might be on the decline in the next few years, but he's also signed for another season, which is kind of nice. So there is Guzman. Then Josh Groves, a great steal in round 5 of 2026. He's only starting to play just recently as well, and he's definitely starting to come into his own. I think he definitely could have had like some breakout years ahead, because you could see from 2035 to 2036, he doubled his home runs. He also doubled his RBIs almost, and he had a much better average and all that. So I think Josh Groves would have been a really good player in the outfield, probably because we could have lost Bill O'Donnell this offseason. Josh Groves could have been that guy to take that step and become that number one center fielder, and then maybe Pineda would have been in the right field. Hard to tell. Then we get into Michael Chu, who's not really much of anything. He hasn't really developed into being that guy, but he was a second-round pick that I think was a project player, if I remember right, when we drafted him. So I don't know if he would have had a better season next year, but we still have a lot of leeway with him. And he had 50 RBIs this year, so that's not terrible. But the batting average is not ideal. It's probably because he doesn't really have the discipline at the plate, but maybe he would have developed into being a good disciplined batter. It's really tough to tell. And then in 2027, we drafted Harvey Sparbory in the 4th round, so pretty solid steal there. He was our number 5 pitcher for the last few years. And I guess we used him as a reliever this last season, but okay numbers, not the best pitcher, probably one of the worst pitchers, that's not even a word, but worst pitchers that we drafted in this series. But as you can see in the WAR front, he's been actually pretty good the last 2 years, but 2034, not so good. First year of his career, he was pretty solid. I'd say he was not a bad pitcher, but he definitely wasn't a great one. So there is Sparbory. At least he made the MLB from a 4th round pick. We also drafted Pablo Silva this year as well, so 2 really solid pitchers. Actually, I should go to the MLB only. Well, let's go to Trevino first, I guess, because it was showing double and triple A, and it's not really that important. We could look at that afterwards. But Trevino, really solid player. He had some injury troubles in his career, but obviously this last playoff run in the World Series, he had a grand slam to help secure us that World Series. So, yeah, he was definitely starting to come into his own quite a bit over the last 3 years, where he was batting at 291 to a 308. And, yeah, I think he would have been one of our best players in a few years, because probably some guys like Ozzy would have been dropping off too much and all that. So, pretty solid on Trevino there. And, yeah, he's still signed long time, and he's not even really making that much money for the type of player he is. Pablo Silva. This guy was drafted in the 3rd round, so 1 round before Sparbory. And he actually kind of developed into being a really solid pitcher. Because I remember you guys saying early on when he was not doing too well in 2033 that he was not going to be that thing. Well, he started to turn the page quite a bit. Like, he got better every single year. 2033 he was terrible. 2034 he was even, well, he wasn't even worse, but he was worse in a sense. 2035 he made a drastic change, and in 2036 this last year he nearly won the MVP. And yeah, he had a pretty good showing this season. You can see with the WAR count, it wasn't really that great there, and then it starts to improve. So who knows, Pablo Silva could have been even better next season, which would have been kind of nice to have behind guys like Garth Howe. So there is Pablo Silva, pretty solid steal. And then there's William Halpern, who really hadn't gotten much time to play, only played 36 games, but he had a pretty solid batting average through those 36 games, so maybe he could have became a decent regular player on the roster at some point, but we will never know. But yeah, batting average pretty solid. OPS in the first year not so good, but solid in the second year. And his WAR off the bench was really good this last season, but the other year was pretty much just average. So not too bad from William Halpern. I don't know how long he would have been on his team still. He does still have a lot of leeway contract-wise, which is good, but there he is. Then we drafted Kenny Ollinger in 2028 in round 5, so another really solid steal. We were using him as a reliever this year, and he seems to be a pretty good reliever. We were going to potentially start him as a starter at some point, but we'd used him as a reliever, and yeah, he gave in a pretty good showing. You could see ERA-wise is pretty solid. He did have one bad year in 2035, but in terms of the WAR, yeah, this last year he was pretty damn solid. Then we have Bobby Hyde, who's kind of an interesting player. We tried him as a starter for a year. He was not very good, so we moved him to reliever the year afterwards. Nearly won the Cy Young as a reliever, which is insane, because he won 19 games out of the bullpen, which is nuts. And then we tried him again as a starter this year, and he didn't do that well, so I moved him back to a reliever for the playoffs. Kind of a weird player in a sense, but a very intriguing one. Could throw a lot of strikeouts. That was his main thing, as you can see over the last 2 years. Almost 210 strikeouts a season, and very solid WAR in his career as well. So, yeah, good pitcher, I'd say, for Bobby Hyde. He was only just beginning. Would he have gone back to starter next season? Tough to tell. because I think reliever is probably where he's best at, but he's making 9.8 only a season, so I think it's a pretty good contract. And yeah, there's Bobby. Then we get into one of our Rule 5 pickups. Jack Birch we took from the Boston Red Sox in 2029. Birch has been a pretty solid reliever, I'd say. At times he came in and just did his job, and other times maybe not so much. But this last season here in 2036, he was really, really solid, with the ERA and WHIP being pretty damn low, his WAR being in the positives as well, and also pretty damn good FIP. So yeah, I did really like Birch. I think he was probably one of our best Rule 5 pickups that we had over the series, and I think without him we probably wouldn't have had as strong of a bullpen. But yeah, he played a little bit with the Detroit Tigers, which is interesting. I didn't even realize that. Not so good over there. He also bounced around between triple A, probably in the majors, it looks like, a little bit. And then he finally gets taken by us and does really well. Then we have Sammy Gomez, who really didn't get to play too much over the last few years. Well, he actually played a lot for a pick at that stage. But he's only 24, and he's starting to become a very, very solid pitcher. As you can see, he started 139 games, and he had a total of 92 quality starts. So he's definitely going to become one of our best pitchers, I think, at some stage. But you can see, like, his ERA very solid over the last 4 years. Probably one of the best pitchers we drafted in the series in a way. Yeah, just very consistent, except for 2034 probably. So yeah, I do like Sammy Gomez quite a bit. The only thing is he would have been getting very expensive because he's only got 1 year of ARB left before he would be a free agent. So there is Sammy. Then we also have Brad Thornton, who really hadn't got to play much, but off the bench has been a very solid power hitter. 23 home runs and threw 460 at-bats as a bench option. Also 67 RBIs. So despite him being a low overall, not really getting much playing time, I did really like Brad Thornton's play in terms of bringing us a little bit of power from the bench, because obviously it's good to have kind of like a guy that could come in these type of spots and maybe get a home run. And yeah, he was that type of guy. Yeah, very solid WAR, especially in 2034. But these last 2 years have been pretty much average. So yeah, there is Brad Thornton. Don't know how long he would have been on this team for, but we did still have some leeway with his contract. Then we got Bill Pineda, who we drafted in round 4 of 2030. He was a pretty solid steal. He's starting to come into his own quite a bit. His first few years, he was pretty consistent, like with the home run count and the RBIs. Then he kind of popped off these last few years where he had 20 to 25 home runs, and he also picked up 80 to 119 RBIs. Batting average, never really super good with Pineda, but the power game and the RBI count has been pretty solid. The OPS is pretty good, but the batting average is a 252, so he was the type of guy that would strike out a decent amount. But yeah, I would say decent player. He would be a free agent in a few seasons. So there is Bill Pineda. Pretty good steal for round 4 of 2030. Then we get to Pete Tavares, who really didn't get to play with us much in this last few years, but he did get to play 10 games apparently. Not really the best pitcher so far, but he probably would have been one of our best relievers eventually in the bullpen. Solid ERA wise, but his WHIP over the first 2 years of his career, pretty high, I'd say. So he did walk a lot of guys. But yeah, he probably could have ended up to being a solid reliever for us once we maybe lost somebody like Jack Birch or Doug Grubel. So there is Tavares. We took him in the second round that year. Then we have in 2031 Carmen Osuna, who probably would have became one of the best pitchers in the series as well, because he was, I think, a really high potential. I can't remember exactly, but started 98 games in his career and had 52 quality starts. So he wasn't necessarily the best off to his career start, but I think he probably would have started to come into his own soon. Maybe could have won some Cy Youngs, that type of thing. And that FIP number has always been pretty good with him too. So, but he did struggle in the playoffs. I believe it was his first year he came into the league, I remember. So there's that. We do still have a couple years of ARB with him as well, and he's only 22. Then we get into our final two players of our roster. Doug Grubel, who we took from Boston as well in the Rule 5 draft back in 2031. Really solid player. Really liked how he was a really good relief pitcher as well, like Jack Birch. Like the two of those guys were kind of hand in hand our best relievers, because they're our only relievers, because our other guys were like setup guys. So there's that. He actually used to play for Miami, which is interesting. I didn't realize that. So he played for the team that that we won the World Series against. Huh, that's cool. Then he spent a couple of years in the minors. We took him in the Rule 5, and yeah, the rest is history. And finally, Bobby Swain, we took in the Rule 5 draft from the Washington Nationals. He was another okay addition. Not really the best player. I don't know how long I would have held on to him for, but we had to get another third baseman once we lost Schneider and Pip. We needed to get another one in just for precautionary reasons. And I mean, 4 home runs and 15 RBIs off the bench. It's okay. The OPS was okay too. So not too bad for Bobby Swain. But like I said, probably not a guy that would be here long term. So there's our MLB World Series winning roster. We had quite a bit of talent that we drafted over these years, and good to see it all get to use and actually get a World Series. I also want to briefly just like skim through AAA stats so you can see all these guys we drafted. Some of them are free agent signings that the computer did as well. This guy was somebody we drafted that we couldn't sign, so we signed him in free agency instead. But literally just looking through this and seeing all these guys that we drafted is pretty amazing over the years, because a lot of these guys are developing quite well. And then we also took like Johannes Berg, for example, who actually was with us a few seasons ago from Kansas City in the Rule 5. Like, we had some pretty solid picks that helped us out in a lot of situations. It's really cool seeing though our entire double and triple A roster being guys that we picked. Juan De Silva was another guy I drafted that I had to sign in the offseason. But in general, our roster pretty damn good. So there is all of that. What else do we want to take a look at here? Oh yeah, former players, I guess. So let's take a look at some former players and see how they did in their teams. Let's actually just go to the Angels and look at Ollie Gelman, because he's the first guy I'll look at. So here is Ollie Gelman with the Angels. Played 1 year with them, but yeah, he had a career high in home runs. Career high looks like in RBIs, just barely edging out 2033. I wish I kind of was able to hold on to this guy when we won the World Series, because the fact he was a great speed type of demon, really could steal bases and all that, but we just couldn't hold on to him long term. And he's not really making that much money with the Angels right now, but he's going to start to get paid more and more each season, so I don't know if we would have had money to actually even sign Gelman, to be honest. But yeah, very solid player for where he was picked. He wasn't off to a great start in his career early on, I think, if I remember right. Yeah, early on in his career, like these first 4 years, he was very much struggling. But then he started to find his game again, and that was really nice. So there is Ollie Gelman. Next, we'll go actually to Houston, because there is some players. There is, first and foremost, relief pitcher Todd Goss. He didn't get the play, I don't think, really any time in the majors, maybe a few years. But then we ended up letting him go because I just didn't really want to give him the money. And yeah, he has not played a single game in the majors since with Houston in these last 3 years. So I guess it's okay that I let him go. He's only 25. He's making 3.9 to play in AAA, though. That's kind of nuts. So that's probably why it was good for us to let him go, because obviously I wouldn't want to be paying 3.9 to somebody that's not on our major league roster. And then the other player was William Montero, who was an okay player at times, but very much struggled with us also at times. So he's played 2 years now in Houston. Had one really good season, his first year in Houston, but looks like his second season, which was this last year, he fell off a lot. His WAR is actually better. Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah, he fell off quite a bit, looks like. But yeah, career FIP-wise, a 505. He was probably one of the best, or not best, one of the worst pitchers I've ever drafted in the series for sure. And yeah, he was never going to get much time with us, probably in our rotation with the guys like Gomez being in now. As you can see, we had to actually play him, it looks like, in AAA in 2033. So there is Montero. Nobody on the Twins that I remember. Let's actually just go through this screen again. See if there's any former players on any of these teams. Actually, let's go to the Phillies for a second. I want to take a look at Ned Thompson. And also the other guy they drafted. So Blanco was that one guy that they drafted that had 99 potential. He was a really good player out of the draft. Not the best rookie season, but 22 home runs and 84 RBIs is great. The average, not so much. So yeah, this guy would have been an insane player in a few years probably. And then Ned Thompson, we know, oh my goodness, 97 at 21. Very good player. Very good player that Ned Thompson is. Yeah, man, this guy would have been definitely a Hall of Famer once his career is done, because he's already got 106 home runs, and he's only 21. Also 327 RBIs. Batting at 290. Jeez. And he would have probably been getting paid some big bucks in a few years, because he's only got 2 years of ARP left. And then he would have been a free agent if the Phillies weren't able to sign him. So there is that. Let's see what else we got here. Any other teams we want to look at? Oh yeah, Jeff Pipp in Washington in 83 at 28. He is the second third baseman. He might be playing first base. Yeah, he's probably playing first base because Kurt Kellenberger's also in the majors. We'll definitely take a look at Kellenberger, because Kellenberger was a random guy that had just bounced around between double and triple A, but he was doing so good, and then he got claimed in the Rule 5 draft, and it'll be interesting to see what his stat line was like. But here's Pip's stats. Pretty solid, actually. Relatively similar to what he did with us in 2035, but obviously since he was more of a starter, he got 23 home runs and 75 RBI, so shout out to Pip for starting to elevate his game a little bit at the age of 28. Not bad. Not bad at all. And he is getting paid a decent amount of money, so hopefully he would be actually able to play that good for that type of money. Let's take a look at Kellenberger, though, because that's kind of an interesting one. Yeah, see, he hadn't played at all, but he's 28 now, and in his rookie season, he actually had a pretty solid showing. I could have probably played him in the majors in our series, in our team, but I just could not find a home for him. Obviously, with Ozzie being first base as well, Kellenberger really just didn't get the time. But pretty good season for him in his rookie year with the Nationals. Probably wouldn't get much of a chance anywhere else other than the Nationals, though, being only a 74. So there's Kellenberger. What else we got here? Trying to think of other former players. Gary McAllister, let's take a look at how he did. If he's still there. Yes, he is. He's their best pitcher. Yikes. The Dodgers pitching is nowhere near where it was in real life at one point. Yikes. Pretty good year. Yeah, Gary's actually been pretty good with the Dodgers since leaving us. Which, obviously, I know some of you guys are going to be like, oh, you should have held on to him longer. I could have held on to him longer, but we have already a really good pitching rotation, so it's kind of useless. He also should be on the decline mode soon, but, yeah, look at all those quality starts with them. Really, really solid. So Gary kind of surprised me. He has not dropped off yet, and he's had some really good showings. He is a pending free agent, which is interesting, so who knows how long he would be still with the Dodgers at this point. So there is Gary. I'm trying to think of who else would be on teams. Let's see. We know that Schneider went to the White Sox, like I said. Let's take a look at him. Seems weird seeing him win the White Sox now. He was actually dealt during the season from Seattle. But, yeah, for a guy that was our first ever pick in the series, he was probably one of our worst picks. Oh my, a 217 at career average is terrible. And then a 645 OPS is okay, but yeah, he definitely had a tough time. His best season, I didn't want to go to that. I wanted to sort. Is there a way to sort this? I don't even know. But his best season was, it looks like, when he had 1.7 WAR. So his best season was in 2033 with us, where he had a 251 average. Oh yeah, that year. The 21 home runs, 72 RBIs. Yeah, I could see why. And then afterwards, he was kind of bouncing with Pip between bench player and not. So there is Steve Schneider, probably the worst player I ever drafted. No offense to him. I did still like him in a way, but yeah, he was not that great. Anybody else? Trying to remember here. I think there was a franchise guy that got drafted by Detroit. I want to see how good he was in his season. Trying to remember what position he was. Oh, I did draft this Lewis Ward guy, but I didn't sign him. Damn, man. Yeah, I drafted this guy in 1 year. I can't remember what year it was, but I do know that I drafted him. I have him on like a spreadsheet, so that's the only reason I know about him. But he's developed into being a pretty solid reliever. Would have been nice to have that type of guy on our team in the bullpen, but there's that. Who was it that I wanted to look at on Detroit? Let's see. Oh yeah, it was. Wait, Where is this guy? Oh, it's Lincoln Dillon. I wanted to take a look at Lincoln Dillon since he's a franchise kind of player. Yeah, very solid, very consistent right now. But yeah, this guy's also going to be a beast for sure. If he's doing that as an 85 overall, wait till this guy's like a 95. He's going to be insane. Any other players I want to take a look at? Trying to think. I don't think there's any other players. So there is that. Anything else I want to take a look at? I'll show you guys also, I guess, what our top prospects would have been going into this next season if we would have been doing another season. You can see that Howard Springer was definitely getting close to the majors. Would he have been on our roster next season? There's a chance, but he would have been probably like a number 2 or number 3 shortstop. There's also Kobayashi, who is starting to finally develop, and he could have been our third base in a few years for sure. Still not the best on discipline and all that, so he probably wasn't going to be a great third baseman, but never know. Then we also have Cedric Fontenette, definitely starting to develop really well. Probably still a long ways away from being a major league pitcher, and his hits per 9, his Ks per 9, his home runs per 9 are all still very low, so that's definitely where he would have needed to work on in order to get to our major league roster. Kind of interesting seeing Gerald Maloney right there behind him, who we could have drafted, but we weren't able to. Would have been interesting to see how this guy panned out. I wish we would have been able to draft that guy because he could have been our number 1 third baseman in the next few seasons. Johnny Almont at number 20. He probably would have made his major league debut next season. Well, he actually... Oh, that's AAA stats and playoff stats, I think. Yeah, he probably would have made his major league debut next year because he's looking pretty solid. Like, he probably would have taken Sparbore's job or something like that, or been more of a relief pitcher. But yeah, Johnny Almont could have been a really good thing for this team, for sure. Anybody else on the top 50 prospects? Fernando Cora, he is 25 years old now. Probably would have been more of a bullpen player, but once again, it would have been a log jam of pitchers, so I probably would have had to make some tough decisions on who would be in AAA and who wouldn't be. But yeah, there is Cora. And we also have a couple other down here, and that being John Bonner, who's still a long ways away, but he is developing that contact game pretty decently. Not the best playoff stats it looks like in AA. And then finally, Carlo Suarez, who didn't have great playoffs apparently either. He was definitely developing and being a pretty good outfielder for the future. Like, I think he could have been in the next 2 seasons or 3, which would have been nice for our outfield, especially with losing potential guys like O'Donnell and all that. So there is all that. Is there anything else I want to take a look at before we end this episode, this final episode? I'll skim through the player of the month stuff from regular season in case you guys wanted to take a look at this. Sixto was the player of the month in May, batting a .373 during that month. And Steiner was the player of the month in April, batting a .441. Jeez. Okay, that's kind of neat. Anything else? I want to make sure I do this series justice, you know, because we obviously want to end it off on this good note. This would have probably been what our roster would have looked like going into these next few seasons. You could see that everybody would have been signed probably for still a few more years, but eventually by like 2039, 40, there's a chance that this team would have definitely suffered a lot of drop off, if depending on the money situation mostly. But you can see right now, 171 million in team salaries, but you go down to next season 125. Season afterwards drops to 94. So Garth Howe's contract getting less and less, Sixto's getting less and less, would help this team out quite a bit. So there is the depth chart, and I think that is it. Yeah, that is going to do it, guys, for this finale of our Vancouver Reign Draft to Glory franchise mode. So I hope you guys really enjoyed this series because I had a lot of fun with it. Obviously, when I first started doing MLB videos a few years ago, I didn't see them doing too well, so I wasn't sure if MLB would actually be a thing that I could do on this channel, and you guys definitely proved that I could do MLB videos as well on top of my NHL stuff. So look for MLB The Show 24 content, obviously, in the spring, as long as the game comes to Game Pass. I should be able to do some content on that as well. And yeah, thank you guys so much for watching this series, and yeah, we'll see you guys with some NHL 24 content up until, I guess, MLB The Show 24 comes out in the spring.